Wanted to give you guys an updated video on the BnD panels. Now you can see here I've got two different panels, and the one here on the left is the BnD 100 Flex, and the one on the right is the BnD 100 Rigid. Now obviously the one on the left is flexible, the one on the right is rigid. The one on the right has a 1-inch aluminum frame all the way around it, and the one on the left has no frame, so it flexes. But right now I built it on a stand, which was less than $5, call it $5 to build. And the one on the right cost me $3 to build the stand. And I'll share those with you in the description below on how to build those stands. Now I've tested over a dozen different panels to find out which one is the best and the lightest weight and so on. Because for me, when it comes to preparedness, I don't care as much about the price. I just care that it lasts a long time and that I can depend on it. Now, the Predator 50 panels are great panels. However, there has been some information out there that says that maybe the plastic on it is not UV proof. And so people who have been using them long term have started noticing issues with those. So not to rag on the Predator 50s, but that is one thing that might need to be looked at, is the UV proofness of them. The BnD Flex panels, which is the one that has plastic on it, has a 25-year guarantee of UV proof, no discoloration, no cracking, no peeling, no anything like that. Now out of those panels that I tested, over a dozen of them, this panel is the absolute best. It comes direct from the manufacturer. One of the things I like about this new BnD 100 panel is that it has an ETFE finish. And that ETFE finish is what gives it that 25-year guarantee. Now the other panels that you see online that are a little bit more affordable use generally what's a PET finish, and that will last about a year before it starts to discolor and crack and cause issues, which is why I do not use PET panels, because if I had to use this long term, which is part of the plan that I have for it, then I don't want to be using it for 1 year and then all of a sudden be out of panels and without power. Now the Predator 50 panels weigh 4 pounds for 50 watts. The BnD 100 Flex is 4 pounds for 100 watts, and the BnD 100 Rigid is about 20 pounds for 100 watts. So the BnD Flex are by far the best weight to power ratio that is out there on the market. Now you'll notice here on the BnD 100 Flex panel that this is not a smooth surface. And the reason that is these little bumps actually trap light within them, so that way more light hits the cells, therefore it produces more power per cell, just because it has those bumps. Now these bumps are kind of soft, they're not really hard, and so this also makes it extremely scratch resistant. So they can all be, you can have all 6, 5, or 3 panels, however many panels it is, laying on top of each other, and even if they've got sand or dirt or anything like that on them, and they're going to be rubbing against each other, it's not going to leave long-term scratches like a lot of the other panels, which is a really big bonus of this new finish. So one of the things that I'm going to do right now is actually show you a live test in the production differences of the BnD 100 panel, the Flex, as well as the Rigid, versus the other top competitors that I have found. Now one of the best ways to make sure your panels are lined up is really just to lay them against the shadow of the sun, or the shadow that the panels make themselves. So you can see that the panel is perfectly square within its own shadow. And I've already tested this to make sure it's at the optimal angle for today. Now today it's already fall. It is a really clear day, but it's not optimal conditions because it's not during the summer. So it's very rare to get 80% production out of a new panel unless it's absolute perfect conditions. So if you get anywhere close to that 80 watt mark, then you're doing really well. And that's during summer. So right now, where it's the fall, if we get anywhere close to that, then it'll be phenomenal. Okay, so I've got the BnD 100 Flex right here, already connected to the Kodiak. Let's go see how many watts it's producing. Okay, as you can see right here, it's producing 70.8 watts, which for this time of year is actually really good. 6 amps, 11.68 volts, so it's exactly where we want it to be. This is these are ideal for this time of year. This is perfect. Okay, I've got competitor number 1 right here on top of the other BnD 100 Flex panel. You can see the BnD 100 Flex panels are just dangling here, and the new panel is what's hooked up. So let's go take a look. Yikes, this one is only making 40 watts. This is actually one of the more expensive ones out there, but clearly it's not working very well. Okay, I've got competitor number 2 lined up. Let's go see what it produces. This one's producing a little bit more than the last one at 55 watts. So that's a little bit better, but that's still only 50% of what it's supposed to be. And the BnD 100 Flex is 70%, which for this time of year is really good. Competitor number 3 hooked up. Let's go see. This one's at 49 watts. Got competitor number 4. Let's see what she's producing. Okay, so far this is the second best at 62.5 watts. And competitor number 5, we'll see how this one does. And this one doing right at 53 watts. So they should all be a little low because of the time of the year. You know, they're not going to exactly reach that 80 to 100 watt mark. And that's okay, so we need to take that into factor. But the bottom line is that none of them got close to the BnD Flex. The BnD Flex really is the highest producing one out there. It's the longest lasting, the most durable, has the longest guarantee, has ETFE finish, has the bubble finish. So all of those factors is what makes it a quality panel. Now, there are other panels out there, as you've just seen. Like I said, I've tested over a dozen of them, but I just showed you 5 that I had right on hand right here. The other ones I've generally gotten rid of because I don't like holding on to them because they're kind of useless. And I kept these just for demonstration purposes so I could show you guys why I use these BnD 100 panels, especially these Flex. Now I'm going to show you the rigid panel now, so that way you can see the comparison of power production. Okay, I've got the rigid one hooked up right here. Let's go see what it's producing. Wow, this one's right at 68 watts. So that's 2 to 3 watts less than the BnD Flex 100, but that's actually still really good for this time of the year. So as you just saw, the BnD rigids are just slightly less power producing than the BnD Flex. And one of the reasons that is, even though you can see that this has an entire other row of cells compared to the BnD Flex, the wires and cabling, all the soldering that happens on these cells is on the front here, whereas on the BnD Flex, you don't see that. Those little lines technically make little shadows and take up power production. And not having the wires and soldering on the front makes it just produce a little bit more power, even though that this has more cells. If you were going to get the rigid panels, it's going to be bigger, it's going to be heavier, it's going to do about the same in production, but your real issue is going to be that weight, as well as the tempered glass front. Now this tempered glass front has been tested to hail damage and so on, and it has passed those hail damage tests, but even still in the end, you risk the fact of it cracking, and if that tempered glass cracks, then you're out of luck with the power production and worried about getting cut by glass. There's actually another solar panel I had at one time that got bumped right on the side here of the frame, and it had a glass pane like this, and that bump right on the side just shattered the entire front of the solar panel. And it could still produce power, but not nearly what it was before. Now on my website, you see it all the time, guaranteed lowest prices. And I've gotten a couple emails of people saying, well, hey, there's other pricing elsewhere. But when you look at those panels, generally you're getting a different type of rigid panel, and that's why it's more affordable. Those are polycrystalline, whereas the BnD rigids are monocrystalline. The polycrystalline will not take damage well. So if they fall or get bumped or get walked on or hail falls on them, any type of anything that could happen, the polycrystalline, as soon as it gets a crack in it, is toast. Now, the monocrystalline BnD Flex panels handle that no problem because of how it's built. They can be walked on, hail damage. You could drop them off a roof. Nothing's going to happen to them because of their flexibility. They're going to stay very strong. If you had that with this, even this monocrystalline panel, well, you're taking that at risk. That's another reason I don't recommend the other panels you see out there, is because they just don't produce the same amount of power being polycrystalline. Monocrystalline is the absolute best way to go. Mine are monocrystalline, so they can take damage, they make more power, and so on. Now, these have a 25-year guarantee as well, which means that they won't discolor or crack or anything like that from exposure to the sun in that time frame. It's important to note, though, that there is a big difference between a warranty and a guarantee. A guarantee is that if you use it in normal conditions, it'll still be producing X amount of power after so many years. So, for example, both these panels, over 5 years, they'll be producing 95% of their original power, and over 25 years, they'll be producing 80% of their original power. So that's a guarantee based on the materials used and the testing done and so on. But that's not a warranty. The warranty on the flex panels is 1 year, and the warranty on the rigid panel is also 1 year. I have never actually found that I need to use a warranty on these panels because of the quality that they are built with. If they get damaged in shipping or anything like that as well, they're 100% covered, no questions there. I do want to talk really quick about these cables. Now, the cables that are right on the panels, they don't exactly have to be 8 gauge. It's okay if they're at nothing smaller than 12 gauge, but 10 gauge is fine. And that's because the energy is traveling such a short distance. However, I have seen a lot of other websites that when they give you the cabling for the panels themselves to reach the Kodiak are either 10 or 12 gauge, most commonly 10 gauge. Now 10 gauge ends up saving you a little bit of money, but talking with the manufacturers of these cables, you cannot carry more than 300 watts over 20 feet with a 10 gauge cable. Well, those people that are selling those kits are shooting themselves in the foot because that energy is not reaching the Kodiak even though it's being produced. So that is why I only use 8 gauge. It is the heaviest flexible gauge you can get for these panels. All of my kits come with 8 gauge cable. Now, talking about the watt meter, you guys have seen the watt meter on my other videos and on my website. However, I have started to see other companies start putting watt meters in their kits and so on. Now, those I personally have issue with because, one, they're not using 8 gauge wire, which this does use 8 gauge wire, and that means that you're not going to be losing any power once you're actually using your solar panels. Because if you go from an 8 gauge wire down to a 10 gauge wire, you run the risk of losing power to your Kodiak, which again is pointless because you're trying to produce as much power as possible. The other issue that I have is you'll notice this one here. Now, by the way, these you cannot buy anywhere, just fixed and done with the connectors and everything. These are custom made just for me, and this is a 200 amp watt meter. Now, the other ones out there, this is a 200 amp peak. They're actually a 50 amp running capacity, just like you see on inverters and solar generators and solar systems out there. So when you get something that's like 150 amp or 100 amp, your actual running amperage is lower than what the panels can produce. The Kodiak can accept up to 30 amps of power. If your panels are making 30 amps of power, but you have a 100 amp or even 150 amp watt meter, well, you could be dumping 30 amps into this, and it could be outputting 25 or 20. And the real problem with that is that's what makes these burn out and stop working, which obviously is a catastrophic failure, can cause fire. It's a big issue. Don't settle for a cheaper, smaller watt meter just to save a few bucks. These are the highest quality you can get. Same thing, they've got a 1-year warranty. Any problems at all, they get replaced, no problem at all. There's one more thing to keep in mind when you're looking at the difference between the BnD Flex and the BnD Rigid, and that is power production if one cell happens to get covered. I'm just going to give you an example here of covering one of these cells on these BnD Flex and Rigid panels. This is normal with most panels, but I just wanted to show you so that way you can understand another reason why I like the BnD Flex over the BnD Rigid. So I'm going to go ahead and cover one cell on the BnD Flex, and we'll look at the power production differences between having one cell covered and one cell not covered. This is the BnD Flex, no cells covered. BnD Flex, one cell covered now. So it lost about 23 watts of power just from covering one cell. The reason that is because all the cells below it are going up vertically, running its power towards the top of the panel. And so when you block off that last cell, it cuts off a lot of that power, which is why it's such a large power loss. If you were to cover one of the bottom cells, it would be a lesser of a power loss. Okay, now I've got the BnD Rigid hooked up. Let's go check it out in the Kodiak and see how much power it's producing. Just under 65 watts. We'll call it 65 for easy math. Cells covered up. Let's go see how much power it's producing now. Whoa, 1.5 watts. This is the biggest reason why I still prefer the BnD Flex panels over even the BnD Rigid panels. With the way that they're wired and the way that they're used, the BnD Flex panel, at most you're going to lose some of your power. With the BnD Rigid, you lose all of your power. Now this is the same for other types of panels, rigid panels especially. Another reason why I like the BnD Flex. BnD Rigid's still great if you can make sure that they stay out of any shade at all. The BnD Flex panels, however, you can even get them in a little bit of shade. You're only going to have minimal power loss, not the whole thing. Just in case you guys don't believe me, I'm going to pick up my camera and live go straight into the Kodiak. .5 watts. So guys, for me, like I've said, quality is the most important thing. Both of these panels are exceptionally high quality. As you saw earlier, they're both making almost the same power, with the BnD Flex making just a little bit more. However, as soon as that shade gets on it, I mean, literally just a leaf or a branch or something getting over one cell, just like that, covering it, stops all the production. So it's really important to factor in all these different things when thinking about preparedness. It looks good on paper, but you gotta test it out. That's what I do. That's what I bring to you guys. So that way you guys know upfront what you're getting. So in the end, what I'm really getting at is it's important to compare apples to apples. The BnD 100 Flex panels are by far the absolute best panel you can get for your Kodiak generator. I've tested them all. To me, it doesn't matter a brand or anything like that. I just want what's best because this is what I use for my family. It's what I use for my preps. It's to run all the things that I need to run. And I'll actually have an upcoming video showing you how to cook with the Kodiak. Yesterday morning, I made my whole breakfast cooking on the Kodiak. So stay tuned for that. But the point is, you can't use low quality stuff and expect great results. I want everybody to be prepared with the best system that they can get, just like what I'm doing. I like complete kits, ready to go, out the door, so that way it's plug and play. You're not worried about any issues as soon as you set it up. One of the things that I have noticed now, having done this for a few years, is the MC4 to Nutric adapter, which is, these are your MC4 connectors. This is your Nutric adapter. It is not common, but when there has been an issue with the kits, it's mostly been with this, and that's mostly just because of how these are connected in here. Now, Energy has come a long way in how they build these, and they put these in place really well, this cabling inside here. So I'm not worried about it anymore, but just in case, my kits are now including 2 of these. They say 1 is none, 2 is 1. That's what we're going for here. This is the weakest point it seems to be over the last couple of years testing this out. So we're now giving 2 of these with every kit that you buy that's a BnD kit. The other thing to keep in mind with these kits is I'm trying to get people prepared like I am in the way that I'm preparing, and I'm preparing to the best of my ability. That is why my kits now include panel carrying cases as well as cable carrying cases. The cable carrying case is really nice just to wrap up all the cables, put them in there. You're not worried about where they are. Same with the panels. It makes everything transportable very easily. Really, guys, in the end, what I'm trying to do is help people get prepared. I just wanted to show you why it is that I use these panels. They are absolutely phenomenal panels. I wouldn't trade them for anything. I like them more than the BnD Rigid. I like them more than the Storm 100. I like them more than the Predator 50. The Predator 50 and Storm 100 are still awesome panels to go with. Not really anything bad to say about them, except what I've mentioned in the previously. And those aren't things that are really wrong with the panels, more so to things that either need adjustment or things to be aware about. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm always available to answer questions. Please email me. Please make comments. I do my best to respond as fast as I can. I'm here to help. Ask me as many questions as you want. There's no stupid question. Please let me help you. I've tried to make it really easy to use the website. You can see the different kits with the different colored stars. The same color star describes the type of kit, and they are different types of panels and connectors and so on in those kits. So pay attention to that. You'll absolutely love using these BnD Flex and rigid panels. They are absolutely wonderful.